Welcome to another edition of Moore's Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. Today on this edition, we have Dr. Pat Velasquez, who we've been knowing for many years, and he's also done a number of shows with us. And in light of the situation that's going on in our community, we decided to have kind of like a roundtable discussion about issues that we need to be aware of as they help focus some of the issues, because it's obvious people are missing the boat on some of the critical issues facing us. And I'm not going to say much except that Dr. Velasquez is originally from Omaha, and that's his Omaha connection. He's also out at San Diego, where he's been for many years, and understand the plight of grassroots and indigenous people and people of color, Latinos, Chicanos, African Americans, and so on, Native Americans, Asians. We must mention those respective groups and not use words like the BIIPO, whatever they say. But again, we call it out for what it is. So I want to start off by saying, Patrick, can you say a little bit more about yourself? And then we'll get into the questions, discussions after that.
Well, briefly, yeah, I was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. I lived there for over 30 years, and I spent some time as a Chicano activist there, and was the director of what was called at the time the Chicano Awareness Center. It has a different name, I guess, now that is perceived, I guess, to be more acceptable for the white community. But I spent a number of years in community advocacy um, in Omaha, Nebraska, mostly in the Chicano community, but also in coalitions with African American community organizations and nonprofits, as well as those kinds of organizations in the Native American community. So frankly, for a number of reasons, became very fed up with the situation in Omaha, Nebraska, the lack of diversity, the lack of political progressiveness, including among people of color. So I left. I had an opportunity to move to San Diego, California, with the illusion that everything would be progressive and more militant in Southern California, and that has not exactly been the case. But I think it still is an improvement over the situation in Omaha. So I've been living about another 30 years or so here in San Diego now. And um, when I came to San Diego, I went back to graduate school and earned my PhD in higher education. And I worked at one of the most racist universities in the entire United States, the University of California at San Diego, for 28 years. I retired 5 years ago. And so I've been involved with a lot of activism and advocacy in higher education in the San Diego area for pretty much as long as I've been here.
Patrick, let's start off with it. Again, it's in the news a lot, is Ukraine. People have been saturating us with the Ukrainian refugee crisis, showing us a lot of these middle-income white families fleeing from the bombing, the killing by the Russian troops, and so on. And my question is that, somewhat as we talk about this whole issue of Ukraine is, what is your respective position as a person of color about that issue? And what are some of the implications of millions of billions of dollars being spent on the military and aid for Ukrainian, and the favoritism towards Ukrainian that flee to the US, as contrast to all the people of color, El Salvador's, Mexicans, you name it, Honduras, Haitians, who can get in? Talk to me a little bit about that, please.
Well, living here in San Diego, I've had a pretty close look at the refugee crisis because San Diego, for people who don't know, San Diego is actually the county of San Diego rests right on the border with Mexico. So right across the border from San Diego is the city of Tijuana, and other cities depending on how far across the border you go. But I live probably 20 minutes from the Mexican border, and ever since the pandemic started, there's been an exacerbation of the refugee crisis in Southern California. So a lot of people claiming asylum, and under the Trump policy, not being allowed to enter the United States, even to make a claim for asylum. And it's really sad, man, that the government of Mexico has cooperated to a large extent with the United States in a policy that I believe they call Remain in Mexico. And so, again, the people who are trying to come through the Mexican entryway to San Diego are not allowed to come in and make their case for asylum unless they just let in a few people every day, is my understanding. So Just about every day here in San Diego, you turn on the local news and you see scenes of it looks like whole cities of refugees that are on the Tijuana or Mexican side of the border and trying to get to the United States. And not just coming for economic reasons, but because of they're fleeing violence, they're fleeing gang warfare, they're being threatened with murder or rape or both. And so it's a really sad situation. And of course, when you see the scenes of the people with these tent cities or cities made out of, housing made out of cardboard, it's inevitably, as they say, the brown and the black. There are a lot of Mexicanos, people who are Mexican that are fleeing um, drug violence and gang violence in Mexico. There are refugees leaving Central America from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras for the same reasons. And then there are many people from Haiti. There are entire communities, black people from Haiti, that are trying to get refugee status that have had to erect small communities in Tijuana in Mexico. And I just read in the paper today about the influx, the massive increase in people from Cuba coming to the United States, trying to get asylum, trying to come in through the gateway between Tijuana, Mexico, and San Diego, California. And so, for the most part, they're being kept out. Again, they're not even allowed to come in and make a case for asylum. And then all of a sudden, the war breaks out in Ukraine, and I'm seeing scenes on TV almost every day of white Ukrainian refugees basically coming up to the front of the line and being allowed to pass right over into the United States. And while the black and the brown folks are being made to remain in Mexico, they're, like I say, just it's a classic case of white privilege. They're giving these white refugees from Ukraine the opportunity to come to the front of the line and to pass over into the United States. Then, when they do get to San Diego, as soon as they cross the border, it seems like they're met by a large concentration of, I guess you could call white refugee activists, people from churches, nonprofits that are willing to be sponsors for these Ukrainian refugees and to provide them with shelter, give them food, give them jobs, and basically, again, to sponsor them, which helps their case of applying for asylum. And so it's really a horrible thing to say. Again, to see the most blatant racism you can imagine, the most blatant racial favoritism. Some of the media in San Diego are pretty quiet about it. Some have called it out there very blatantly for what it is. It's a clear example of racism.
Patrick, here's a point that hit me as you were saying. Number one is I remember that the Cubans, once they got to the shores, they almost gave them automatic refugee status because they hated Fidel Castro and the Cuban government. And then number two, in the work that I did at Catholic Charities with refugees and help people come over here, there were quota systems that they allowed only so many people from certain countries. So what you're in a sense saying is they've thrown that out the window, the playbook, and just playing this white supremacy, white privilege mentality about white folks when you got these other people who've been in line. Some of them filed application forms and they're still waiting for immigration to deal with their some sense of dignity. So you're basically saying from what you see from the perch of San Diego, because of Nebraska, we don't see a lot. We see the unflow of the small groups who make it to us. And then we got a lot of redneck racists here who are using immigration as their campaign thing as government, governors rather. And again, the state of Nebraska doesn't deal with immigration on that level. But if you didn't know any better, you think it was the number one issue that we got to keep people off of our vastly unpopulated state, when obviously the people in agriculture and in certain manufacturing jobs need more bodies, because a lot of people jumping out of the workforce because they don't want to deal with the COVID, they don't want to deal with the harassment, they don't want to deal with the negativity, and some of these hostile work environments are just out of control. So I find it amazing that you described this situation. They're rejecting anybody because in actual fact, this country needs a lot more workers to help us out to keep our economy halfway decent.
Right. And again, it's a total violation of the principles of international law. I'm not an immigration lawyer or anything like that, but from my understanding, the way that asylum claims are being made, certainly the color of your skin should not be a reason for you to be put to the front of the line, or the idea that you're fleeing violence. There's no doubt that there's violence in the Ukraine as a result of the Russian invasion, but there's every bit the same degree of violence in Central America and Haiti and Mexico, and people's lives are threatened in a very real sense to the same degree. So, what I have heard fairly recently, I think as recently as a couple of weeks ago, the United States announcing a new policy that they call Unity for Ukraine. Unity for Ukraine.
Wait, did you just make that up, Patrick? Come
No, I'm serious, man. And supposedly this will enable about 100,000 Ukrainian refugees to come to the United States with a sponsor. And this was described on the media by a spokesperson from the White House as better than the normal refugee process. So what does that tell you? It's going to be better than the normal refugee process. And if people are sitting around wondering, well, why is this happening? It makes perfect sense from the standpoint of, as you said, the racists who see this as a way to further whiten America,
right,
whiten the United States.
right.
The right wing, the whole Republican Party for years now has become increasingly concerned about the so-called browning of the United
Right.
States,
That's
and
true.
more African American and Latino, Chicano Latino people coming to the United States. And by the way, there's plenty of studies that show that immigration from Mexico has stabilized. So there's no reason for white people to be in a panic about Mexican immigration or losing everything that they stole, losing what they stole to some other people that might steal it from them.
You know,
So,
as Patrick used the word stole, I'm like, at first I go about the Native Americans and this whole critical race theory and how people want to act like we can't talk about the genocide we practice against brown, black, Native, Asian people, because back in the day, it's just like in Australia. They used to kill the Aborigines and nobody ever went to trial or went to court for killing an Aborigine like they kill a buffalo. So
right.
you can show and look at the historical archives and see that there were many people who were enslaved who was murdered by their white masters or castrated, and you got these clowns running around like they don't want to talk about that history. Well, all you do is reverse engineering and look at the conditions of our people, and particularly since some of our people were here before many of these Europeans got here, and we're stuck at the bottom because they practice this white privilege, they practice this racism, and more than anything, they use it with public funds. There is no excuse for a government or public entity with public funds to have 1 or 2 person of color in any given room. In other words, when you walk in a room and everybody's of the same racial group, meaning all white, and it's in a city that's half Hispanic, Latino, African Americans got at least a significant number here in Omaha, and we're not in the room and they're talking about our situation. It's crazy. So one thing I was going to switch up on you if I could, and I know we come back to Ukraine, but one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I think it's something that we talked about in some of our previous program, is what is going on in terms of when we're dealing with some of our universities and we deal with critical race theories and we talk about progressive education. You and I were both in a class house. We met at UNO in a urban education classes with a major in there. And how can we address some of those strategies? And also, how can we address some of this critical race theory that's been thrown at us in a more heightened level from Florida, Texas, Arizona, now Nebraska? But how can we address some of that? And what do you
Well,
think are solutions?
yeah, there's multiple battlegrounds. Certainly, one is in the state legislature. And I know here in California, I think we've talked about this before, that there's been a state law passed that says that every student who graduates from the California state universities, there's different levels of universities publicly funded in California, but there's I think 17 campuses across the state of the California State University, and just as of a couple of years ago, um, every student who graduates from those universities has to have at least one course in ethnic studies. And to their credit, the people who pushed this legislation through made sure that ethnic studies courses were defined as Black studies, Chicano Latino studies, Native American, and Asian American studies. So some of these other groups that are coming in at the last minute trying to say, well, gee, we should be part of this curriculum also. They were not included in the legislation, and frankly, that's a good thing. So the legislature is one place where people can push, but again, it's there are times I have to remind myself that in some ways, at least, I'm fortunate to be in a state like California where the demographics are such that it's almost impossible for a Republican to win statewide office in the state of California now. Virtually all the statewide offices of governor, attorney general, secretary of state, lieutenant governor, etc., are all Democrats, and most of them are people of color.
But wait, hold on, Patrick. How come that happened? Is it because of the numbers?
Yes, it's his demographics, and it's going to hopefully continue that way because, like right now, Chicanos and other Latinos outnumber whites in the state of
In the
California.
state of California.
Yes, but we're a young population, so amongst the voting age population, that's not the case. But eventually, we presume it will be, and so hopefully we can continue to make an impact politically. But I think in terms of community organization, that's what some of us are doing in San Diego. We're trying to demand accountability from our local colleges and universities. And in the county of San Diego, there are 3 universities, publicly funded universities, and 8 publicly funded community colleges. And so some of us are pushing to make sure that every one of those campuses has a strong program of Chicano studies and or ethnic studies so that our students don't just get in, but they have an opportunity to learn something relevant that'll enable them to be leaders in their community and create the kind of positive change that we need to see.
The other thing is you mentioned that in Nebraska, they just got through passing a bill. You may not be aware of it since you're in California, where they were talking about genocide as a subject matter to talk about in school system. And at some point, I think one of the African American state senator amended it to look at genocide against Native Americans and African Americans, particularly what happened during enslavement. And again, the manifestation destiny tour that they forced the Native Americans to do, as well as the thing that happened, they took their lands and killed them, wounded knee and elsewhere. And at the last minute, I guess some kind of way they took out the clause that deals with enslavement or genocide against Africans. And again, the treatment of Native Americans as genocide. And so genocide is basically defined in this law as teaching about the Holocaust, which happened across the ocean. And it didn't happen, obviously, in the United States. And so my question or point that people raise is they need to go back and amend that bill. But secondly, where are the Jewish people with their sense of camaraderie with oppressed people? Again, as you listen to some of the stuff that goes on, quiet as a church mouse. In other words, if we're going to talk about the Holocaust, and that's been one of my things when I was teaching the Black Studies, till they decided that they didn't want me teaching Afrocentric stuff. But Holocaust, genocide, and stuff that happened to other people of color and lynchings, you name it, has to be talked about because it affects us traumatically historically. And again, we can talk about the lynchings of Latinos or Chicanos. We can talk about the lynchings and the behavior they treated to Asian Americans when they came here. So we have a history that's very full of case examples. And again, if you look at the archives and you look at some of the stuff that's on microfiche, you won't find too many white folks, if any, have ever gone to trial for killing somebody of color, and particularly when you look at police officers over the years. So those are some of my concerns. If you're going to talk about genocide, it doesn't necessarily happen in one country like Bosnia, Rwanda, you name it, Turkey, and so on. It happens across the globe, and the United States is probably one of the countries that has perfected it. And we know that Adolf Hitler learned a lot of his techniques on how he treated the Jews, on how Americans, white Americans, treated African Americans in this country. So again, it becomes a convoluted kind of disingenuous argument when they say genocide, and yet they don't want to look in their own backyard. And particularly in Nebraska, you think we would know better than that.
Yeah, I mean, if my primary concern with this is United States history, and I have no problem with students in public schools studying world history. They should learn about the Holocaust of Nazi Germany, but to the same extent, they should learn about the Holocaust that took place in the Congo region of Africa at the hands of King Leopold and the Belgian regime, which murdered more people than the Nazi Holocaust in Europe. But again, my main concern is a true teaching of United States history and all the episodes and patterns and structures of racism that took place, as you mentioned, the takeover of the American Southwest, the entire theft of half of Mexico's national territory, the lynching of hundreds, if not thousands, of Mexican people. And again, nobody ever suffered any legal consequences for that. No white person was ever prosecuted for murdering a Mexican and or taking their land. And the Holocaust, the genocide against Native Americans, the institution of slavery. So if we don't teach those things in depth, and if we don't make a connection between them and the status of those communities today, which is ultra important, then we're really doing our students a disservice. But again, what we're seeing is as the demographics in the United States change and so many white people see their power and their privilege shrinking, they're going to resort to the most treacherous consequences or methods that they can, including just the blatant falsification of United States history.
You know, it reminds me of gaslighting, the gaslight history. And you go like, remember, you go into a classroom, and that's the thing we encountered with our white professor, who would not talk about, he would talk about American education, but he didn't include African Americans and Chicanos in there, or Native Americans. So we had to basically protest. He capitulated. But again, it goes back to the notion of what's happening. I'm going to switch up, if I can, to ask you, and I know that you've worked with this, the fact that you were in higher education, and I see it here in Omaha. We got a Pee Wee Herman type personality who they brought in from Utah as the head highest paid Black person at the University of Lincoln dealing with so-called diversity. They got another Black person, so-called Black person, who's teaching, or who's from Kansas, who's diversity at the local campus. And what is unfortunate, and I guess the same thing you probably may have experienced, where they bring these imports in. I use the word imports because they don't have any connections with the indigenous people who've been suffering for many years in the land of Babylon, or however we want to call it. And they pay them extraordinary high salaries, and you don't see them do anything. And so it goes back to this concept of DEI and race equity type people and inclusiveness, and they avoid the word anti-racism, whatever. And my question is, when you look at some of these high-level people in California, look at them in Omaha, what is going on? How come we're not dealing with our topics when they so-called bring people who look like us, have the same pigmentation, but yet we still walk around dumber than rocks about our culture? And this new generations, I almost have to pray for them because they have no clue about some of the things we're talking about. But what is it like for you dealing with some of these higher level folks who should know better? And again, we just had one leave Nebraska, go to another job, but didn't hear a peep out of him when he was in the job. And I look at the people in these departments, Black studies, I don't hear nothing of them in the community fighting against racism, even on campus. So how do we address some of our so-called leaders who look like us, and they're imposters is the word I may want to use here?
Yeah, we've seen different profiles like that here in California. I would say one of the really frustrating things that I have seen is spaces like the University UC San Diego, where I worked for many years, and the fact that a number of progressive people of color really fought for the hiring of a chief diversity officer on the campus, somebody that would bring in the commitment and the expertise to establish and implement a plan to diversify the entire campus. And we also asked for cultural spaces like Black resource centers, Chicano resource centers. And what we ultimately found was that the administration, which was thoroughly racist, would bring in a chief diversity officer, and they would establish these cultural centers and then completely co-opt both of them, so that they simply ended up contributing to the racist status quo. So they would very carefully select a chief diversity officer who would come in and, again, just defend the status quo. Or,
Wow.
or
Sounds
to
like I'm all
simply,
in Douglas County here.
yeah, or to simply erect what we called symbolic representations of diversity and equity, something that didn't really make any substantive transformation in the institution. And for those people who were trying to create change, the chief diversity officers ended up trying to discipline them or to get them fired. And
Wow.
so UC San Diego's is a really strong example of a chief diversity officer that came in and has done nothing to create positive change, and in fact has worked really hard to uphold the status quo. And then they have the cultural centers reporting to that person, so they make sure that those centers do not become a catalyst for any real institutional transformation. So it's been a real difficult challenge, man, because a lot of us saw those things as part of the solution to the toxic institutional racism on college and university campuses. And when we finally almost coerced the institutions to implement them, they're so effective at co-opting them that it puts us back to square one.
Well, Patrick, as you're saying that, it sounds almost it looks like we can't have no input. And one example you mentioned here is Creighton University. Creighton University have had lynch ropes on their campus. They've had blatant examples of racism over the years, sexual harassment. One of the latest things that I've talked about happened a few years ago where they fired a Latino or a Chicano who's been there for many years and nobody knew how he disappeared. A cloud of smoke like a magician. And then they put in a white female who doesn't live in Omaha or Nebraska, lives in Council Bluffs, and they make her the head of the diversity on campus. And I talked to her at one point, and she said that one of the reasons that she's in her position as a white female is she wants to help make the white males feel more comfortable because they didn't feel comfortable dealing with these other people of color. So again, it's that Karen Becky mentality. And I've sent a number of letters complaining and said, hold on, you can't even get one person of color on your campus to help address these issues. They did bring in some high level out of town carpetbagger Negro. I'll call him a Negro for a better term, but they brought him in for a couple of years and he lasted for maybe 2 or 3 years, if that, and went to another place in Colorado because they were treating him like he was in a broom closet. And he complained about some of that to me. But again, when he came in, he didn't establish any relationships with some of the grass tops and the advocates who asked for Creighton University with their Jesuit created through slave holding and enslavement of many Africans back in the day. And Georgetown's doing a great job of at least talking about it in some forms of record. But Creighton University's got their head in the hole or somewhere else where they're not even dealing with it. So part of the frustration, again, you alluded to that, is what do we do? Do we just start to say, let's get rid of Black studies when they're becoming Uncle Toms or sellouts or collaborators? Do we get rid of these positions? Are we in such an inept situation that we're just happy to have a dark-skinned face in a position that doesn't produce any outcomes or results? Are we at blame ourselves? Because again, if I look at our conditions, I can see how people sometimes want to blame the victims in this United States.
Well, I think if we sit back and take that, then we do have to share some of the responsibility, and we just have to keep fighting. We have when an institution hires a chief diversity officer that's not for real, that's not trying to create change, we can't say, oh, but we don't want to criticize that person because they're Hispanic, and we don't want to criticize their own. We have to call them out, and we have to attack them. We have to tear them down, and we have to tell the institution that what that person is doing is not why we wanted these positions. So we have to continue to hammer away and make specific suggestions and demands, recommendations. And I think we have to, again, do the same thing with our state legislators because to me, Creighton University is like a pretty helpless or hopeless situation. We have a Catholic university in San Diego called the University of San Diego. And I see that pretty much the same way. It's a private religious institution. I'm fairly familiar with the role that the Catholic Church played in the oppression, the imperialism of Latin America, including Mexico. And so I don't have any hope for any Catholic institution to play a positive role in my community. So, but for the publicly funded institutions, we have to hold our state legislatures accountable because they're providing at least some significant amount of the funding every year for those institutions.
Patrick, coming back to something that's dear, and I'm going to do a little change up, or they say switch up, as we say, a call an audible. Back in the day, I remember in Omaha, you were involved in a number of policy arguments. You wrote a number of letters. I know you were a pretty good writer. As Matthew said, you weren't as good as me, but you were a good writer. And I like to tell people I make my typos and grammatical mistakes, but as Malcolm says, English is not my mother language. I got kidnapped here. So my question to you is, we pay taxes to public institutions. We alluded to that a little bit earlier. How can we write letters, or how can we write about our experience? Because a lot of us, as we get older, we're losing track of being the griots or being the historians of our community, whether it be Black, brown, Asian, Native American. As you see some of the older Native Americans pass off, they're losing their language, so on. But how can we do a better job to help our people understand what we go through? Because I see a lot of these young whippersnappers talk about Black Lives Matters or some of these recent demonstrations as the essence of civil rights. And they have no clue what many of our great grandfathers and grandmothers and leaders and ancestors went through to get us this far. So how do we pass that legacy on in terms of writing? And I say that because I look at a lot of Negroes and bootlickers and Uncle Tom, and in my lifetime, I've never seen one letter, one advocacy, one anything. Again, I'm not criticizing your grammar, anything in writing where you sign your name of something that you leave as a breadcrumb for the next generation. So how do you do that, or should we do more of the writing, even though we come from oral traditions where we can talk a lot, but we don't necessarily put it in writing? What is your vision or viewpoints on how do you do that for, let's say, your grandchildren and those children who are not yet born?
Well, I think in terms of the change process, the change to try to create more racial equality, we have to use every weapon at our disposal. We have to use multiple strategies, and I think that's the most effective means. It's part of it is the strategy of raising consciousness in our own community, and that probably is the priority, because we will not get white lawmakers or policymakers or decision makers to listen to anything we say if we don't have a community that's conscious, that's politically and socially conscious. So there's a lot of work that we have to continue to do in our own communities with our own people, and to try to continually raise consciousness. Again, that's an ongoing process that should never stop. But what you say is another viable strategy, man, that we have to write to lawmakers. Nowadays, virtually every elected official has a website, and it doesn't take much time or effort to go to your city council member's website, or your United States senator, or your governor, and just bang out a quick letter. And they add those things up, man. They keep track of those things. And so if we organize those kinds of campaigns, they can conceivably make some degree of impact. Again, it's not the panacea, but it's one of multiple strategies. I think what you're also describing, Jamal, is another symptom of colonialism.
Mm.
Part of the colonial process is that we lack confidence in our ability to communicate, that we don't see ourselves as people of color who can write, that can communicate in writing to the same degree that white people can. And so, we've got to break out of that colonial mentality and start, I think, doing more writing. And again, to use every means necessary, as Malcolm said, and everything from social media to writing editorials for local newspapers. It's a frustrating process because, again, a lot of what we do gets either omitted or ignored or edited. But I think it's still a viable strategy, although I would never consider it to be a panacea or the most viable strategy. But I think it's important to do. I know the things that we've been doing on YouTube are another important way to get the word out. But I think the issue of confidence and breaking out of the colonial mentality is a key part of this.
As you said that, it resonated with me about somebody made a comment, and I guess Malcolm is the one I constantly quote, but he says if we would drop our differences, we could get a lot accomplished. And I look how the system, and particularly the racist hegemony of the United States government, local, Douglas County, city of Omaha, they bring in their certain people and they divide and rule. Or I've been in a situation where people act like they don't know each other and so on, and they don't want to talk. But one of the things that somebody asked me once, and I didn't know how to answer it well, but it's kind of a strange question. Who would you consider your comrades or your people in? Could you name 10 people who were actively involved in the struggle as long as you've been? And they asked me that question, and I couldn't think of a lot of people. I sit there and I thought about people who were unfettered, who had jobs, even those who retired. And you knew that back in the day when you were in Omaha, them folks retire, get their jobs, and they, particularly people of color, they go back south, they go back southwest, wherever they came from. And then we still stuck here with the evil geniuses and the kind of folks who were oppressive to our education, our kids. But if you have to name some folks or name or give examples, could you count that on one hand or two hands or 2 hands and 2 feet? because I couldn't do it in Omaha. And again, I'm going by people who are out there doing stuff, challenging the system. And I'm not talking about shadow boxing or sitting in the corner doing some dysfunctional behavior on Facebook. But can you come up with people who jump out in your local domain? I'm not talking about nationally, but in your environment.
Yeah, I think I could at least come up with 10 to a dozen names of people.
Okay.
And the way that we always put this, or we often put it, is these are folks that I would feel comfortable walking into battle with.
Okay, that good point. Good
Yeah,
point.
that I would not fear going into battle with them, that I know they wouldn't back down, that I know they wouldn't say something stupid or racist. Uh, because that happens sometimes. I mean, we've both been in meetings where there's somebody that maybe shouldn't have been invited to the meeting and they say something that just destroys all your momentum. But yeah, I can think of probably 10 to a dozen people
Okay.
that I'd say, yeah, I'd feel very comfortable going into battle with them. And some of them, maybe half of them would be students that I worked with at
Oh,
UC.
students.
Yeah, some of the university students, the black students, the Chicano students, Filipino, Asian American students, Native American students, that they were fearless, man, and they were very
Wow.
intelligent.
In California.
Yes,
Wow. Can
and
you break some Omaha? Because I wrote to the UNO Black Studies Department, and them Negroes were scared. They act like they didn't want to call me back or respond to the letter. And all I was saying is, what are you doing to help people off campus? They don't know what's going on campus.
they might
Wow.
be willing. They might be willing to visit Omaha as long as they don't have to stay. So, um,
Wait,
but
wait a
no,
minute,
seriously,
man.
man,
I'm still here.
a lot of the students and some are also now working professionals. That a lot of students that I work with have become teachers or attorneys or even university professors. And again, they're fearless. They're very analytical. They're intelligent. They know the conditions in our communities. And but even in Omaha, there were some people that I always felt good going into battle with. If I could name one person, it would be a Chicana lawyer named Rita Melgares.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
I don't
everybody knows
know if
Rita.
you remember Rita, but she was very bright, very knowledgeable, and utterly fearless, man. And
Right, right. I'd seen
so
her.
I always felt a sense of strength going into meetings with her, regardless of who we were meeting with. And so yeah, I've had the good fortune, I think, to be around some folks like that and had
Yeah.
an opportunity to meet them. And even now, I have some mentors and folks that I'm still working with that I feel that way about.
Right. One thing we didn't talk about, and I think it's probably one of the issues that are probably the most important one that we got to deal with is law enforcement. And lately, there's still been a number of murders and killings. And also, I think at one point in our conversation, we alluded to on campuses, you got police officers acting like they're in the military and they're treating students differently and so on. And you also see uh, this kind of slow trend where the police officers have become almost like inside of every institution as the protector of whatever against whatever. So there's a tremendous amount of money going into the police department, double dipping budget. They retire, they get a pension for lifetime, they get health care benefits, you name it. And then many of them jump ship as soon as they can get their pension plan and get another equally lucrative job sitting around, in schools as SROs and you name them. But how do you feel about us becoming much more like a police state, especially with little accountability? Almost every 6 months, somebody's shot and killed by a police officer, and they spend, as one of the officers said to me in the sheriff, they spend more money on bullets and things like that than on how to de-escalate situations. And sometimes you can talk people off a rope or you can talk them off a ledge or whatever. But this military and this police officer, and even by the way, the three people running for governor, they all came out with a commercial where they had a gun on their shoulder as if they're protecting the country from somebody who's invading. But how do we deal with some of this militarization of local law enforcement, which again, part of the school to prison pipeline for many of the Black, Brown, Native kids and some Asians who are in our country?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to work collectively to try to put the brakes on that as much as possible because, I'm part of an organization in San Diego of Chicanos that have been advocating in higher education for over 30 years. I would say within the last 2 years is the first time that we really started to say, hey, we need to take a look at the way law enforcement is being implemented on our public college campuses. That these same campuses that are telling us, well, we don't have enough money for a black resource center or for Black Studies. We don't have enough money to hire more Chicano faculty or for a Chicano Resource Center. We don't have enough money for a center for the undocumented students. And then we find out that they're spending exorbitant amounts of money on law enforcement. Now, these are college campuses that lie within the jurisdiction of some other law enforcement entity. So, in other words, if there's a college campus within the city of San Diego, why is not the San Diego Police Department responsible for public safety on that campus? And instead, the campus itself starts its own police station and its own.
Well, that Metro Tech's a good one. Metro Community College, the police officers are mostly former retirees, or
Yeah,
they cream them off and they work at the college and they have guns on them.
I was able to get appointed. This is a process that just recently started, but I was able to get appointed to a advisory committee to the San Diego Community College District on police. And I met on Zoom. I met the chief of police for this community college district, and he introduced himself as saying, you know, I'm a retired 30-year officer, 30 years as a police officer with the San Diego Police Department, and now he moves over and becomes the chief of police for the community college district. And so there's something amiss here. And then there's at least one other community college district that signs a contract every year with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and pays them some exorbitant amount of money to do public safety on their campuses. So we're trying to look into this. Fortunately, what we find in the community college districts is that some of the Chicano and Black faculty that are part of the union, that the professors' union or teachers' unions in those districts, are taking a hard look at the way that law enforcement is being implemented, and they're raising some important questions. So I'm hoping that we can bring this to light. Well, the first thing that I've observed is how these law enforcement entities on college campuses are totally unaccountable to the community. They won't tell you what their budgets are. I had the chief of police of San Diego State University's campus. They have their own chief of police. And when we asked them, we wrote to them and said, what is your annual budget? And he wrote back and said, we don't have an annual budget.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so, I mean, how can you not have an annual budget? And, you know, every entity, man, I worked in student affairs for 28 years at UC San Diego. Almost every day, some administrator told me, Patrick, prove to me that the services your office provides are effective. What kind of assessment do you do? How do you prove that you're doing something effective with students? And if you ask those same questions with these law enforcement entities on college campuses, how do you prove that you're effectively providing public safety? They'll tell you either we don't have to do that, or we don't know, or gee, sorry, we can't tell you. But the answer I've received most of the time is we're not required to do that.
Well,
So they're
Patrick, how can you
spending,
be not required with public funds? That doesn't make sense to me.
well, unless somebody again collectively organizes to put the brakes on this, then this is going to continue. So we have to try to put a stop to this now.
Wow, we're getting kind of close to the end, but one thing I want to bring up, and I think is probably something that we got to look at constantly, is how do we recruit more people into the circle? One of the things and more, we're trying to do interviews, we're trying to challenge systems, we're trying to raise some critical questions, because a lot of things that you and I have talked about, or people in our community talk about, is information and knowledge. And one of the things that resonated just now, as you mentioned, is lack of accountability on some entities who are getting thousands of dollars. For example, in the city of Omaha, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, but they recently are using TIF money to help the Mutual of Omaha build a new building down where the public library is. And the mayor's having a number of secret private meetings where they're also going to have a trolley that goes from downtown, from the library or the new Mutual of Omaha building to the medical center and to this Mutual building. And so it's kind of crazy, but what freaked me out was that you had a city council person who represented the district voted for it. And you got some crazy convoluted things going on privately, and they use consent agenda because they sit in those back rooms and make up all these rules and change laws in privacy away from the private from the public scrutiny because they're into these so-called private meetings as opposed to dealing with HR issues where names are mentioned. But what they've done is expanded both in the school board and into city council and county commissioners, where they're having private meetings and deciding public agendas. And then when they come out, they put it on the consent agenda. And then when people come up and talk, as you remember back in the day when you and I used to go to school board meetings, they won't respond. The lawyers have basically tied their tongues up where they can't even respond or ask you a question because they're afraid that if they're going to say something that's asinine or expose their scheming process where they're hiding away from those. And yet every time I look up, my taxes are going up on my property tax related to the schools and other entities that won't allow us to sit in the same room as they're figuring out how to take our money. So as one of the concerns I think we got to talk about is how do we make sure that elected and public officials and that our communities are engaged and we repopulate ourselves as advocates of social justice, because as you and I both know, there are very few people who do the work for the many, and particularly in social justice, because this work is not easy and it's a lifelong commitment. And again, if you don't have the skin, if you don't have the thickness of skin to deal with it, I see some of these young whippersnappers, they run for office, somebody attack them, they're ready to jump out and never run again because they can't stand of someone challenging them on some things that may be untrue or true. But again, it's my point is, how do we replicate ourselves? Because again, we're becoming, I like your word, Chicanosaurus, we're becoming older and we're in a situation where we got to do what our parents helped us to do to get this far. So how do we start to bring more of our people who can do advocacy and also do it where they ain't got no scandals and running down the street with their draws on the stick?
I think part of it is hopefully the work will help to do that. That if we're doing effective work, that people will be attracted to that and they'll want to be a part of the process. But it's rough, man. Like you say, people of color, I think, almost inherently see that when they see people like us, they see that what we're doing, as you said, is very difficult work. Is not for everybody. Um, I remember I had a young lady ask me one time, Patrick, why do you want to be a martyr? Why do you want to be a martyr? And I said, I don't see myself as a martyr. You know, that's not my role that I see. I'm not trying to do myself in or run myself into the ground. But from a distance, I think that may be the way that we come off. Like young people will see us and think, yeah, either plus I don't know enough, I don't know what they know, and I don't want to come off sounding stupid enough. And and there are people that'll say, well, gee, I don't want to go to one of these organizations because am I black enough? Am I Mexican enough? Will they think I'm not really Mexican? And so it's a tough thing. Somebody told me something a long time ago, and they said, "Man, we're always going to try to get more members into our organization, but we're going to push forward and do the work that needs to be done, even if there's one or two of us. That we're never going to let the lack of masses keep us from pursuing the work. So I think we have to keep trying to organize and recruit, and at the same time push forward. Like I say, hopefully some of the work that we do will attract people. The one thing you said, and we can spend a couple of more programs on this, is this whole idea of like where the money comes from or where the money's going. And literally every issue that we talk about, money's at the heart of it. Somebody's trying to get rich from it. Um, Law enforcement people are seeing the same thing that the military found out a long time ago. What a way to make money, right? To incarcerate people, what a way to make money. And everything again that we talked about with the Ukraine, who do you think's getting rich from all this money being spent on arms and bombs and missiles? I've been just thinking, and I guarantee it's not black people, it's not Chicanos, but just think of the people that are getting fat and wealthy off all the public expenditure in the Ukraine. And so, critical race theory, all these issues, man, like they all affect the pocketbook. And so I think we have to continue to remind ourselves that when we critique racism in this country, we have to critique capitalism alongside it. And I know there's a theory that says that the reason why Martin Luther King was assassinated was not because he was critiquing racism, but because late in his life, he began to critique capitalism and to say that, I don't think it's really going to be possible to achieve racial equity in the context of United States capitalism. So people talk about global capitalism or racist capitalism, and we've got to understand that that plays an important role in subjugating our communities as well.
You know, on that note, we're getting very close, but something hit me as you were talking. I got invited probably about a month ago to go visit the FBI office for the first time and talk to the head agent in charge. And I found it fascinating. The places like Fort Knox, and you got to leave your cell phone, your cell watch, anything out at the in your car elsewhere, but you can't take it in the building. As I got in the building, I ended up talking to the agent in charge, and he was a nice guy, and his assistant who is part of PR. But I would bet I'm the first African American male who came from the community who, from an African point of view, in the history of the FBA who've been in there, because they've been focused on, you know, the kind of PACE program, work with young kids, big wheels, all that kind of stuff, and also going out talking to people. But one of the things I try to impress upon them, if they're serious as law enforcement, as the police department claim they're serious, you got to bring people into the office and bring it to your headquarters, and not like you got all the knowledge to give in our community. And I'll go back to your work you did with the Omaha Police Department over 30 years ago, where you did the training with them, and they basically were intimidating you, and they had the guns, and they were talking disrespectfully. I would argue that even the Omaha Police Department to this day and age have never or rarely had someone do what you did 30 years ago who's indigenous to the community critiquing them. And so when they sit there and talk about good community relations, it goes back to what you just said about Martin Luther King. We have to look at the paradigm differently and see the man as Malcolm X in different light. Cesar Chavez, we look at him differently, and we look at things of all our great leaders from a different point of view when we study history years later. But at the end of the day, Patrick, one of the things that I think is probably the most important is how well did we do what we had or did with the abilities that we have? Again, I'm not going to expect someone who's limit cranial capacity or who's like some of the people I see on the school board to do a lot of advocacy, because that's how they're not capable of some of that. But those of us who know better should do better. So I appreciate you coming on, and we're talking more, and hopefully we'll have opportunities to bring more light, heavy light, particularly to our viewing audience. But the thing I would be remiss by not closing that. One of the things that you and I both shared, we knew Matthew Staley, and whether we agreed or disagreed with him, we knew he was always going to light up Kendall on somebody's butt. And that's what we really want, because as Billy Preston says, nothing from nothing leaves nothing. So when you got these do nothings doing nothing, don't expect nothing from them. So thank you for being on this edition of Throwing Down Some Heavy Light. This will be on our Facebook page as well as our web page, Facebook, both of that. And then also we will give the viewing audience an opportunity to critique and give feedback, and also suggest other issues we need to address as more. So thank you again, and hope that you have a great evening. Barocco.
Until next time.